There are promises that change entire lives. This story begins with such a promise spoken by a desperate woman and kept by an honorable man. Arizona Territory, September 1885. 15 miles east of the town of Mesquite Springs. Jim Brennan had built Red Creek Ranch from bare earth. 4 years had passed since his wife's death, and in those 4 years he had transformed this land into something that resembled a home. But only resembled it, because some things cannot be rebuilt with hands alone. The sun was settling low on the horizon, painting the desert in shades of amber and gold. Jim Brennan rode slowly across his property, a man of 40 years who carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived loss and learned to keep moving. His face was weathered by sun and wind lines carved deep around his eyes, not from laughter, but from squinting into distance, always watching, always working. His hands on the reins were calloused strong, the hands of a man who had built everything he owned through sweat and determination. The ranch spread out before him as he crested the small rise. 300 acres of hard-won land. Cattle grazed in the distance, their forms dark against the fading light. 2 ranch hands worked near the barn, their movements efficient and familiar. This was his kingdom, small but his own, earned through years of backbreaking labor after Margaret's death had left him hollow. As he approached the main house, he could see her. Sarah, his daughter, 16 years old now, standing on the porch with one hand shading her eyes, watching for him as she did every evening. She waved when she spotted him, and something in Jim's chest loosened slightly the way it always did when he saw her. She was the best part of Margaret that remained the reason he had kept going when grief threatened to pull him under. Jim dismounted near the barn, handing his horse's reins to Sam Mitchell, his foreman. Sam was 55, weathered as old leather, a man who had worked ranches since he could walk. He had been with Jim since the beginning, through Margaret's illness, through the funeral, through the long, empty months that followed. "Evening, boss," Sam said, his voice gravelly. "Everything quiet out there?" "Quiet as it gets," Jim replied. "Check that south fence tomorrow. Looked like it might need reinforcing." Sam nodded and led the horse toward the barn. Jim walked to the house, his boots heavy on the wooden steps. Sarah met him at the door, her face bright despite the flour smudged on her cheek. "Pa, you're late," she said, but there was no scolding in her tone, only relief. "Dinner's almost ready." Inside, the house smelled of cooking, of wood smoke and something burning. Jim hung his hat on the peg by the door and followed Sarah into the kitchen. The table was already set, 2 plates facing each other across worn wood. On the wall above the fireplace, a photograph hung in a simple frame. Margaret Brennan captured in a moment of time, her gentle smile frozen forever. Sarah brought out a pot of stew and a basket of biscuits. The biscuits were burnt around the edges, their tops too dark. Jim sat down and took one, breaking it open with his fingers, steam rising from the pale interior. "Best biscuits in Arizona," he said, taking a bite. Sarah laughed, a sound like water over stones. "Pa, you always say that even when they're burnt." "That's because it's always true," Jim replied. The biscuit was indeed burnt, but he chewed it anyway, watching his daughter as she served the stew. She had Margaret's eyes, that same shade of brown that caught the light. She had her mother's kindness too, that inability to see someone in need without wanting to help. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence that comes when 2 people know each other well enough that words are not always necessary. But then Sarah spoke, her voice careful. "Mrs. Chen asked today if we need help with the harvest," she said. "She said she knows someone looking for work." Jim looked up from his plate. "We've got Sam and the 2 other hands, that's enough." "But Pa, last year you said your back was hurting during harvest. You're not getting any younger." Jim allowed himself a small smile. "You worried about your old Pa." "I just want you to take care of yourself," Sarah said. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Mama would want that too." At the mention of Margaret, Jim's eyes drifted to the photograph on the wall. 4 years. Sometimes it felt like yesterday. Sometimes it felt like a lifetime ago. "Your mama knew what to say," Jim said quietly. She always knew. I just work. That's all I know how to do. That's not true, Pai, Sarah said. You know how to take care of people. You took care of Mama. You take care of me. You took care of that three-legged dog last year. Jim chuckled despite himself. That dog turned out to be a good ratter. And the injured coyote that bit Sam? All right, that one was a mistake, Jim admitted. They both laughed then, and for a moment the house felt less empty, less haunted by the absence that had defined it for 4 years. That night, after Sarah had gone to bed, Jim stood on the porch and looked out at the land he had built. The stars were emerging brilliant points of light in the darkening sky. He thought about Margaret's words she had spoken years ago when he had hesitated to help a Mexican worker who had been injured near their property. Jim, she had said, her voice gentle but firm, when you see someone drowning, you don't ask how they fell in the water, you just pull them out. He had helped that worker, had given him food and shelter until he healed. Margaret had been right then. She was usually right about things like that. Jim touched his wedding ring, the gold band still on his finger after all these years. He had never considered removing it. Margaret, he whispered to the night sky. Our daughter is growing up strong. She's so much like you. But me, I'm still just working. Still just getting through days. I don't know what I'm waiting for anymore. The stars offered no answer, but Jim had not expected one. He went inside, locked the door, and climbed the stairs to his empty bedroom. Morning came with the roosters crowing and the sun painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and orange. Jim rose before dawn, as he always did. Dressed in worn work clothes, and went downstairs. Sarah was already in the kitchen making coffee, her hair tied back in a simple braid. They shared a quick breakfast, and then Jim was out the door saddling his horse for the morning rounds. This was his routine, checking the fences, counting the cattle, making sure everything was secure. The ranch demanded constant attention, constant work, and Jim gave it willingly. Work was easier than thinking, easier than feeling. He rode south toward the far edge of his property where the creek ran along the boundary line. The morning air was cool, pleasant before the heat of the day would settle in. Birds called from the scrub brush, and in the distance he could see dust devils dancing across the desert floor. As he approached the creek, Jim heard something that made him slow his horse. A sound like movement, like someone or something disturbing the brush near the water. His hand moved instinctively to the Winchester rifle in its scabbard. This was still rough country despite the years of settlement. Danger could come from many directions. Jim dismounted quietly, drawing the rifle, and moved toward the sound. He pushed through a stand of mesquite trees and stopped abruptly. A woman stood by the creek's edge. She was thin to the point of gauntness, her clothes torn and filthy. Her long, dark hair tangled and matted. She was Apache, that much was clear from her features, from the way she held herself despite her obvious exhaustion. But what struck Jim most was her eyes. They were not the eyes of someone defeated. They were tired, yes, desperately tired, but there was something in them that resembled defiance or perhaps determination. She saw him at the same moment he saw her. Her hand moved to her belt, drawing a small knife, holding it before her in a defensive posture. She did not cower. She did not beg. She simply stood there watching him with those fierce, exhausted eyes. Jim raised his free hand slowly, a gesture of peace. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I mean you no harm." The woman studied him for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice hoarse but clear. The English words shaped carefully. "Then you make choice," she said. "Kill me quick and clean, or take me as wife and give me protection. I will not beg to white men anymore. I will not run. I choose now." Jim felt as if he had been struck. He stared at this woman, at this strange, desperate creature who had just offered him the most bizarre ultimatum he had ever heard. His first thought was that she must be mad, driven insane by whatever hardships had brought her to this place, but looking into her eyes, he saw no madness. He saw only a terrible, clear-eyed desperation, the desperation of someone who had reached the absolute end of choices and was making one final stand. "Ma'am," Jim said, lowering his rifle completely, I'm not going to do either of those things, but I will help you. Let me. He saw surprise flicker across her face, quickly masked. She did not lower the knife immediately, but her stance relaxed slightly. Jim approached slowly, stopping several feet away. He pulled his canteen from his belt and held it out. Water first. You look like you need it. Drink slow. She hesitated, clearly torn between need and caution. Finally, she reached out and took the canteen with her free hand. The knife still held ready in the other. She drank, and Jim could see the effort it took for her to drink slowly when she clearly wanted to gulp it down. When she finished, she handed back the canteen. "Why you help?" she asked, her voice still rough. "Because you need it," Jim said simply. "That's reason enough." He studied her more carefully now. She was young, probably not yet 30. Her dress was Apache in style, but torn and stained. There were no obvious wounds on her, but she moved stiffly as if every motion cost her. How long had she been out here alone? "My name is Jim Brennan," he said. "I have a ranch about 2 miles north of here. You can come there. Food, shelter, a place to rest. No questions right now." "What you want in return?" she asked, suspicion clear in her tone. "Nothing," Jim said. "Just come rest, get your strength back. Then you can decide what you want to do." She studied his face for a long moment, and Jim felt as if she were looking straight through him, measuring his worth, his honesty, his intentions. Finally, she nodded once. "Can you ride?" Jim asked. "Yes," she said. She finally lowered the knife, tucking it back into her belt. Jim brought his horse forward. He helped her mount, keeping his touch respectful, his movements careful. She was lighter than she should be, all bone and sinew. When she was settled in the saddle, Jim mounted behind her and turned the horse toward home. They rode in silence. Jim could feel her tension, the way she held herself rigid, ready to fight or flee at any moment. He understood. Trust had to be earned, especially from someone who had clearly been hurt by men before. When they reached the ranch, Sam was working near the barn. He looked up as they approached, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of the woman. But he was too experienced to comment or question immediately. Jim dismounted and helped the woman down. "Sam," he called, "set up the bunkhouse. Clean blankets, fresh water for washing, and bring some of that beef stew from lunch." Sam nodded and headed toward the small building that served as quarters for temporary workers. Jim turned back to the woman. "The bunkhouse will be yours," he said. "Door locks from the inside. You're safe here. Rest, eat, clean up if you want. We can talk when you're ready." "Your daughter," the woman said, her eyes moving toward the house where Sarah had appeared on the porch, staring at them with open curiosity. "Sarah will understand," Jim said. "Don't worry about her, just worry about yourself right now." He led the woman toward the bunkhouse, leaving the door open behind them, a silent message that she was free to leave whenever she chose. Sam brought the supplies, quickly setting them inside without comment, though Jim could see the questions in his foreman's eyes. When they were alone again, the woman looked around the small room. It was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a small table, a wash basin. Compared to sleeping rough in the desert, it must have seemed luxurious. "Thank you," she said quietly, and Jim heard the weight of those words, how difficult they were for her to speak. "You're welcome," he replied. "I'll be up at the house if you need anything, otherwise no one will bother you." He left, walking back toward the main house where Sarah was waiting, practically vibrating with questions. "Pa, who is that woman?" Sarah asked the moment he was within earshot. "Someone who needs help," Jim said simply. "Is she hurt? Should I get Doc Harrison?" "Not hurt the way you mean, just tired, very tired." Sarah looked past him toward the bunkhouse. "She's Apache, isn't she?" "Yes. Some people in town won't like you helping her." Jim met his daughter's eyes. "Do I look like I care what they think?" Sarah smiled slightly. "No, Pa, you don't." Then her expression turned thoughtful. "Mama's clothes are still in the trunk upstairs. She's about Mama's size. Should I take some to her? Her dress is all torn up." Jim felt something warm move through his chest. his daughter offering kindness without being asked, just as Margaret would have done. "That would be real kind of you, sweetheart." Sarah started to go, then paused. "Pa, are we going to be in trouble for this?" Jim considered lying, considered offering false reassurance, but Sarah deserved honesty. "Maybe," he admitted, "but some things are worth trouble." Sarah nodded and went inside to gather clothes. Jim stood on the porch looking back toward the bunkhouse. Through the small window he could see movement, the woman's silhouette as she moved around the small space. What had she been through? What had driven her to such desperation that she would offer those two terrible choices to a stranger? Kill me or marry me. As if those were the only options left in the world. Jim thought of Margaret's words again. When you see someone drowning, you don't ask how they fell in the water, you just pull them out. He had pulled this woman out, now what? The afternoon passed slowly. Sarah took the clothes to the bunkhouse, knocking softly and leaving them by the door when there was no answer. Sam went about his work, but Jim caught him glancing toward the bunkhouse more than once, clearly curious but too loyal to pry. It was late afternoon when the woman emerged. She had washed and changed into one of Margaret's old dresses, a simple brown cotton garment. Her hair was clean and braided back. She looked different, more like a person and less like a ghost of the desert. She walked toward where Jim was working with a horse that had been limping for 2 days. The mare was skittish, tossing her head as Jim tried to examine her hoof. He was growing frustrated, worried he might have to put the animal down if the injury was serious enough. "May I look?" The woman's voice came from behind him. Jim turned, surprised. "Sure," he said, stepping back. The woman approached the horse slowly, speaking softly in Apache. The mare's ears pricked forward, and incredibly she calmed. The woman knelt beside the injured leg, her hands gentle but sure as she examined the hoof. "Stone lodged deep," she said, pointing, "and tendon swollen here." She worked the stone free with careful fingers, then straightened. "Need willow bark tea. Soak cloth wrap leg. Reduce swelling." Sam had wandered over to watch. "We don't have willow bark," he said. "Hot water, salt, whiskey work too," the woman replied. Jim and Sam exchanged a look. She knew horses, knew them well. "Your name?" Jim asked gently. "Aida," she replied. "Aida," Jim repeated. "I'm Jim. This is Sam. Thank you for helping with the mare." "Your wife's horse?" Aida asked, glancing at the brand. Jim said. "She passed 4 years ago." Something shifted in Aida's expression, a flash of understanding, of shared grief. "I am sorry," she said. "Thank you," Jim replied, then carefully. "You know horses. Where did you learn?" "My husband," Aida said. Her voice was steady, but Jim heard the pain beneath it. "He was horseman, best in our band. He taught me." She did not elaborate, and Jim did not press. Sam went to fetch the supplies for the poultice, and together the three of them treated the mare's leg, working in a comfortable silence. When they finished, Sarah appeared with a tray bearing a pitcher of lemonade and 4 glasses. She had that determined look on her face that reminded Jim so much of Margaret. "Thought you all might be thirsty," Sarah announced, setting the tray on a nearby fence post. They stood in the shade, 4 people drinking lemonade in the late afternoon heat. Sarah's presence seemed to ease some of the tension. She had that effect on people, that natural warmth that made everyone feel welcome. "What's your name?" Sarah asked Aida directly. "Aida." "That's pretty. What does it mean?" "It means dancer," Aida replied. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "My mother hoped I would be graceful." "I think it suits you," Sarah said with the easy confidence of youth. Aida looked at this young girl, at her open, friendly face, and something in her seemed to soften slightly. "Thank you," she said quietly. It was in that moment, standing in the shade with lemonade glasses in hand, that Jim felt the first stirring of something he had not felt in 4 years. Not quite hope, but something close, a sense that perhaps the walls he had built around himself might have a door after all. But peace, when it comes, is often brief. The sound of approaching horses made them all turn. 3 riders were coming up the road from town, and Jim felt his jaw tighten as he recognized the man in the lead. Frank Dalton. The man owned half of Mesquite Springs and wanted to own the other half. He was 48, dressed well, the kind of man who measured everything by its price and found most things wanting. His 2 companions were hired men, rough types who did Dalton's dirty work. Dalton did not dismount. That was a power play, staying mounted so he could look down at those on foot. His eyes swept over the group and fixed on Ayita with obvious distaste. "Brennan," Dalton called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Heard you picked up some Apache trash near your property." Jim felt Sarah stiffen beside him. He put a hand on her shoulder, a silent message to stay calm. "I helped someone in need, Dalton. That's my business. It becomes my business when it affects land values," Dalton said. "I'm planning to bring the railroad through here. Can't have settlers scared off by Indians." So that was it, the railroad. Jim had heard rumors that Dalton was negotiating with the Southern Pacific, trying to establish a route that would pass through Mesquite Springs. Land along a railroad route became valuable overnight. "Red Creek Ranch isn't for sale, Dalton," Jim said flatly. "Told you that twice already." "Everything's for sale at the right price," Dalton replied. His eyes moved back to Ayita. "That woman wouldn't happen to be the Apache who killed Jack Mullins 3 weeks ago near Copper Creek, would she?" Jim felt the words land like physical blows. Killed Mullins. He glanced at Ayita, saw her face carefully blank, but he caught the flash of fear in her eyes. "You got accusations, take them to Sheriff Bradley," Jim said, keeping his voice level. Dalton smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "This whole town runs on my money, Brennan. Bradley knows it. The judge knows it. They all know whose hand feeds them. That's how business works, Brennan." He leaned forward in his saddle. "Here's how this is going to go. You get rid of the Indians, sell me this land at a fair price, and we all walk away happy. Or the law comes for her. And anyone harboring a murderer becomes an accessory. That includes you. That includes your daughter." Jim stepped forward, his hands clenching into fists. "You threaten Sarah Dalton and we're going to have a problem." "No threat," Dalton said smoothly. "Just facts. You've got 24 hours to decide." He turned his horse, his men following. "Make the smart choice, Brennan." They rode away, dust rising behind them. Jim stood very still, fighting the anger that threatened to overwhelm him. When he finally turned back, Ayita was watching him with those fierce, measured eyes. "I should go," she said quietly. "No," Jim said. "He will bring trouble to you, to your daughter." "He's already trouble," Jim replied. "Has been for years. This isn't about you. It's about land, money, greed. You're just an excuse." Sam cleared his throat. Boss Dalton wasn't bluffing. He does own most of the town council. Jim looked at his foreman. "Then we need to know the truth." He turned to Ayita. "Did you kill Jack Mullins?" Sarah gasped softly, but Jim kept his eyes on Ayita. He needed to see her face when she answered. Ayita met his gaze directly. "Mullins was drunk. He followed me to my camp, said he owned me now that I had no choice. I said no. He grabbed me. We fought. He fell, hit his head on rock. I did not help him after. I let him die." She paused, then added, "I did not murder, but I did not save. In white man's law, maybe that is same thing." Jim studied her face, looking for deception, for evasion. He saw only exhausted honesty. She was telling the truth as she knew it. He believed her. "Self-defense," he said. "White man's law won't see it that way," Ayita replied. "Not when it's Apache woman and white man." "Then we make them see it," Jim said with more confidence than he felt. Sarah stepped forward. "Pa's right. We tell the truth. People will listen." Ayita looked at this girl, at her youth and innocence and absolute faith in justice. And something painful crossed her face. "You are brave," she said softly. "But world is not always fair to the brave. Maybe not, Sarah said, lifting her chin. But that doesn't mean we don't try. Jim felt a surge of pride in his daughter. Margaret would have been proud too. Aita, he said, you asked me why I help. Truth is, I don't completely know yet, but I know this. You're here now. That means something to me. I won't let Dalton or anyone else hurt you without a fight. Why you risk so much? Aita asked. You don't know me. Maybe I'm tired of not risking anything, Jim said quietly. Maybe I've spent 4 years just existing and it's time I started living again. Maybe helping you is helping myself too. They stood there as the sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the ranch. Sam, practical as always, broke the silence. So what's the plan, boss? Jim thought for a moment. Tomorrow we go to town. We talk to Sheriff Bradley, see what he knows. We find out exactly what Dalton's planning. And we find proof that Mullins was the kind of man who'd attack a woman. And if we can't find proof, Sam asked, then we make them see the truth anyway, Jim said. He looked at Aita. You willing to stand up and tell your story publicly? Aita was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. Yes, I will not hide. Not anymore. Good, Jim said. He turned to Sarah. Inside. Let's have dinner and figure this out. As they walked toward the house, Aita following hesitantly, Jim felt the weight of what he had committed to settling on his shoulders. He was not a hero. He was just a rancher, a widower, a father. But sometimes ordinary people had to do extraordinary things. Not because they wanted to, but because no one else would. That evening, after a simple meal where they discussed plans and possibilities after Sarah had gone to bed still full of righteous conviction, Jim stood on his porch and looked up at the stars. Aita joined him after a moment, standing at a respectful distance. Your daughter has kind heart, Aita said. Like her mother. Exactly like her mother, Jim agreed. You loved her very much. Still do, Jim said. Love doesn't die just because the person does. They stood in silence for a while. Then Aita spoke again. When I said those words today, kill me or be my husband, I meant them. I was ready to die. I chose that moment to end. But you did not let me. Couldn't, Jim said simply. Just couldn't. Why? Jim thought about it, really thought about it. Margaret taught me that helping someone isn't about whether they deserve it. It's about seeing they need it and acting. Questions can come later. She was right about most things. Figured she was right about that too. I am grateful, Aita said. But I bring danger. Dalton will not stop. Then we don't stop either, Jim replied. He turned to face her fully. Aita, I'm making you a promise right now. I will stand with you through this. We'll find the truth. We'll prove what Mullins tried to do, and we'll make sure justice is done. You have my word. Aita looked at him for a long moment. In her eyes, Jim saw the war between hope and fear, between trust and the instinct for self-preservation that had kept her alive this long. I accept your promise, she finally said, and I make promise too. I will not bring shame to your house. I will be honest. I will be brave. And if we survive this, I will repay debt. No debt, Jim said. Just do what's right. That's all any of us can do. After Aita returned to the bunkhouse, Jim remained on the porch. He looked at the wedding ring on his finger, at the gold band that had symbolized his life with Margaret. She was gone, but her lessons remained. Her kindness, her certainty that doing right mattered more than doing easy that lived on. He had made a promise to a desperate woman. Now he had to keep it. And in keeping it, perhaps he would find out if he was still the man Margaret had believed him to be, or if 4 years of grief had worn that man away entirely. The stars offered no answers, but Jim had not expected any. He went inside, locked the door, and prepared for whatever tomorrow would bring. Because in 24 hours, Frank Dalton would come back for an answer. And Jim Brennan was going to give him one he would not like. That was certain. And so the promise was made. And the road ahead, uncertain and dangerous as it was, had been chosen. Morning came with the crowing of roosters and the first pale light of dawn touching the eastern mountains. Jim Brennan had not slept well. His mind had turned over the problem like a man worrying at a splinter trying to find the angle that would let him pull it free without causing more damage. By the time the sun began its climb, he was already dressed and downstairs making coffee in the kitchen. Sarah appeared shortly after, her hair still loose around her shoulders. She moved quietly, sensing her father's mood. Together they prepared a simple breakfast of eggs and bread, the silence between them companionable but weighted with the knowledge of what the day might bring. "Are we really going into town?" Sarah asked finally. "We are," Jim replied. "All of us. Hiding makes Aita look guilty. We walk in with our heads high, we face this straight on. Some people will be angry. Let them be angry," Jim said. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, the steam rising in the cool morning air. "Your mama used to say that doing right doesn't mean doing popular. It means doing right." Sarah smiled slightly. "I miss her." "Me too, sweetheart. Every day." Sam arrived as they were finishing breakfast, his weathered face creased with concern. "Boss, you sure about this? Dalton's had all night to stir up trouble. Town might not be friendly." "Since when do we make decisions based on friendly?" Jim asked. "Get the wagon ready, we're going in." Sam nodded and headed back outside. Jim walked to the bunkhouse and knocked on the door. After a moment, Aita opened it. She had clearly been awake for some time, her hair braided, Margaret's dress clean and neat. But Jim could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes moved past him to scan the ranch yard. "We're going to Mesquite Springs," Jim said, "to talk to the sheriff, to let people see you're not hiding. You don't have to come, but I think it would help." Aita was quiet for a moment. "I will come," she said finally. "Running is over." "Good," Jim replied. "We leave in 20 minutes. The ride into Mesquite Springs took almost an hour. Sam drove the wagon with Jim beside him on the bench. Sarah and Aita sat in the back, Sarah talking quietly, trying to ease the tension. Aita answered in short sentences, but Jim could see her hands clasped tightly in her lap, betraying her nervousness. Mesquite Springs was not a large town, 400 souls, maybe less. One main street lined with wooden buildings, their fronts painted in optimistic colors that the desert sun worked constantly to fade. The general store, the saloon, the church, the doctor's office, all the essential structures of frontier life packed into half a mile of dust and hope. As the wagon rolled down Main Street, people stopped to stare. Jim had expected this. A white rancher bringing an Apache woman into town openly in daylight, that was news. That was scandal. Conversations died as they passed. Women pulled their children closer. Men watched with hard eyes. Jim kept his gaze forward, his jaw set. Beside him, Sam sat equally rigid. In the back, Sarah reached over and took Aita's hand, squeezing it. Aita did not pull away. They stopped in front of Chen's general store. Mrs. Chen stood in the doorway, a small Chinese woman with steel in her spine. She had run this store for 15 years, ever since she and her husband had arrived from California. She knew what it was like to be unwanted. "Mr. Brennan," Mrs. Chen said as Jim helped Sarah and Aita down from the wagon. "Miss Sarah," her eyes moved to Aita. "And you are Aita," the Apache woman said quietly. "Welcome to my store, Aita," Mrs. Chen said. There was no hesitation in her voice, no uncertainty. "What can I help you folks with today?" Jim felt something in his chest ease slightly. One ally. That was a start. Inside the store, the air was cooler, smelling of flour and coffee, and the 1,000 other goods packed onto the shelves. Jim began gathering supplies while Sarah and Aita browsed near the fabric. Mrs. Chen moved behind her counter, watching the street through her front window. The door banged open. 2 men entered, both rough types that Jim recognized as workers from Dalton's various enterprises. Jake Turner and Pete Mason, men who made their living through intimidation and occasional violence. "Mrs. Chen," Jake said loudly, "you serving Indians now? Thought you had some standards." Mrs. Chen's expression did not change. I serve paying customers. You have business here. Pete stepped toward Aida, who had gone very still near the fabric table. Sarah moved closer to her, protective. You're the one that killed Jack Mullins, ain't you? Pete said. Aida lifted her chin. He attacked me. I defended myself. That's not what we heard, Jake said, moving closer. Heard you murdered him for his money pouch. That's a lie, Jim said, his voice cutting through the tension. And you know it. Jake's hand moved toward his belt where a pistol hung. You calling me a liar, Brennan? The door opened again before Jim could respond. Sheriff Tom Bradley entered, a man of 45 with gray threading through his dark hair. He had been a good lawman once before Dalton's money had started flowing into his pockets, before compromise had become easier than principle. That's enough, Bradley said. Jake, Pete, get out of here. We were just talking, Sheriff, Jake said with false innocence. You were just leaving, Bradley replied. His hand rested on his own gun, a subtle but clear message. The two men looked at each other, then at Jim, then back at the sheriff. Finally, they turned and walked out. But not before Pete spat on the floor near Aida's feet. After they left, Bradley turned to Jim. A word outside. They stepped onto the wooden boardwalk. The street was busy now, people going about their morning business, but watching, always watching. Jim, Bradley said quietly, you're making this hard for me. Making what hard, Tom? Doing your job. Bradley's jaw tightened. You know the situation. Dalton's been pushing me to arrest her, says he has witnesses that saw Aida with Mullins before he died. Paid witnesses, Jim said. Maybe, probably, but I still have to investigate. And you bringing her into town like this, it looks like you're throwing it in people's faces. Or maybe it looks like we have nothing to hide, Jim countered. Tom, you know Mullins' reputation. You know what kind of man he was. Bradley looked away, his discomfort obvious. Knowing and proving are different things. Then let me prove it, Jim said. Give me a week. Let me find evidence, find witnesses, real witnesses. Dalton won't wait a week. Then tell Dalton to go to hell, Jim said flatly. Bradley laughed, but there was no humor in it. Easy for you to say. You don't have a family depending on your job. You don't have Dalton's hand in your pocket. So get his hand out of your pocket, Jim replied. Remember why you put on that badge in the first place. Bradley was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the street. Finally, he sighed. 1 week, Jim. That's all I can give you. After that, I have to bring her in for questioning, and if Dalton pushes harder, I might not even have that long. 1 week, Jim agreed. Thank you, Tom. Don't thank me yet, Bradley said. Dalton's not the forgiving type, and neither is this town when it gets worked up. Jim returned to the store. Mrs. Chen was wrapping purchases in brown paper. Sarah and Aida stood together near the counter, both looking tense but unharmed. Everything all right, Pa? Sarah asked. For now, Jim said. He paid Mrs. Chen, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. As they left the store, Jim saw people watching from windows, from doorways. Some faces showed hostility, a few showed curiosity. Fewer still showed something that might have been sympathy. They loaded the supplies into the wagon and prepared to leave. But as Jim climbed onto the bench, a voice called out, Mr. Brennan! Jim turned. Father McKenna was hurrying down the boardwalk, his black coat flapping his white collar bright in the morning sun. The priest was 58, Irish, with a face that showed both kindness and the weight of too many confessions heard, too much human weakness witnessed. Father, Jim said, touching his hat brim. I heard about your guest, Father McKenna said. He glanced at Aida in the back of the wagon. I wanted to say if you need any help, spiritual or otherwise, my door is open. Thank you, Father, Jim said, surprised. That means a lot. There's going to be talk, the priest continued. Probably already is. Some of my parishioners are already upset. But I've been thinking about what Jesus said, about the woman caught in adultery, about how he told the crowd, let him who is without sin cast the first stone. He looked directly at Jim. Jack Mullins was no saint. We all knew it. And I think we all know deep down what kind of man would attack a woman alone in the wilderness. Justice isn't always convenient, Mr. Brennan, but it's always necessary. Will you say that from your pulpit, Father? Jim asked. Father McKenna smiled slightly. I was planning on it this Sunday. Might make for an interesting service. They parted ways and the wagon rolled out of town. Sarah was beaming. See, Pa, good people will stand with us. Some will, Jim agreed. But Father's right, there's going to be trouble. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Aita stared out at the passing landscape, her expression unreadable. When they arrived home, she helped unload the supplies without being asked. Working efficiently, keeping busy. Jim recognized the behavior. It was what he had done after Margaret died, filling every moment with work, so there was no time to think, no time to feel. That afternoon, while Sarah was inside preparing the midday meal, and Sam was checking on the cattle, Jim found Aita near the corral. She was watching the horses, her hands resting on the top rail of the fence. You all right? Jim asked, joining her. I am used to being stared at, Aita said. Used to being unwanted, but your daughter, she held my hand. Mrs. Chen welcomed me. The priest offered help. This is new. Not everyone is cruel, Jim said. No, Aita agreed. But enough are, and the cruel ones have power. Jim could not argue with that. Tell me about Mullins, everything that happened. Aita was silent for so long that Jim thought she might not answer. Then she began to speak, her voice low and steady. After my husband died, the reservation would not keep me. They said my blood was not pure enough. My mother was Mexican, captured as child, raised Apache, but never accepted fully. That mark passed to me. So I left, tried to survive alone. She paused. It was hard. Hunting is difficult for women alone. Other Apache bands would not take me. White settlers, they see Apache woman alone, they think many things. Most not good. And Mullins. I was camped near Copper Creek, small camp hidden. I thought hidden. But Mullins, he found me. He was drunk. Said he had been watching me for days, said he would take care of me, protect me, but I had to do things for him. Things I would not do. Her hands tightened on the fence rail. I said no, begged him to leave, explained I was widow in mourning. He laughed, said Indian women don't get to say no to white men, said that was the way of things. Jim felt cold anger settling in his gut. He grabbed me, Aita continued. I fought. I am not strong like man, but I am fast. I had knife, cut his arm. He became more angry. We struggled. He pushed me. I pushed back. He stumbled, fell backward. There was rock, large rock. His head hit. She turned to look at Jim. I watched him bleed, watched him die. Could have helped, maybe used my dress to stop bleeding. But I did not. I watched. Then I took his canteen and I ran. How long ago? Jim asked. 3 weeks, maybe more. I lost count of days. And you've been living rough since then. Aita nodded. I knew they would look for me. Knew white man's law would not believe my story, so I ran, hid. Until I could not run anymore, until I was ready to die. Jim absorbed this. That's self-defense, clear as day. To you, Aita said. To white judge, white jury may be different. We'll find proof, Jim said. Mullins must have a history. Men like that don't start with attempted rape. There will be other victims, other stories. Other women too afraid to speak, Aita said quietly. I understand that fear now. They stood together in silence, watching the horses move lazily in the afternoon heat. Finally, Jim spoke again. Why did you say that, kill me or marry me? Those exact words. Aita considered the question. In Apache way, woman without man has no protection, no status. She is nothing. I thought white man might kill me, quick end suffering, or might want woman take me as wife, give protection. Either way, my choice would be over. No more running, no more fear, just ending of one kind or another. That's a hell of a choice, Jim said. It was only choice I had left, Aita replied. She looked at him curiously. Why you choose neither? Why not kill me, get rid of problem? Why not take me as wife, have woman to cook and clean? Jim thought about how to answer that, because neither of those was right. You're not a problem to get rid of, and you're not property to acquire. You're a person. That should be enough reason to help. Aida studied his face. Your wife taught you this. She tried, Jim said. I'm still learning. Sarah's voice called from the house announcing that the meal was ready. As they walked back together, Jim noticed how Aida moved, always alert, always watching. A woman who had learned to never fully relax, to always be ready to run or fight. He wondered if she would ever be able to let that guard down, and he wondered what it said about him that he wanted her to feel safe enough to try. The rest of the day passed in work and routine, but as the sun began to set, Jim saw riders approaching from the direction of town. 3 of them. Even from a distance, he recognized Frank Dalton's expensive horse, his straight-backed posture. Sam! Jim called. Get the rifle! Sam emerged from the barn with a Winchester, handing it to Jim, but staying close, his own pistol visible on his hip. Sarah came out onto the porch, and Aida appeared from the bunkhouse, drawn by the tension in the air. Dalton and his 2 men stopped 20 feet from the house. This time, Dalton did dismount, a calculated show of respect or threat. Jim was not sure which. Your 24 hours are up, Brennan, Dalton said. What's your answer? My answer is no, Jim said flatly. Ranch isn't for sale. Aida stays. That's final. Dalton's face darkened. Then you're a fool. Sheriff Bradley will be here tomorrow with an arrest warrant. Let him come, Jim said. We'll face that when it happens. And the murder charge, Dalton pressed. You really want to tie your name to a killer? She's not a killer. Sarah's voice rang out from the porch. She defended herself against a man who attacked her. Dalton's eyes moved to Sarah, and Jim saw his daughter falter slightly under that cold gaze. But she did not back down. Little girl, Dalton said, you don't understand how the world works. I understand right from wrong, Sarah shot back. And what you're doing is wrong. Dalton laughed without humor. Brave words. Let's see if you still feel brave when your father loses everything because he couldn't mind his own business. He remounted his horse. Last chance, Brennan. I'm a reasonable man. Walk away from this. Let the law handle the Indian. Sell me the land. You can even name your price. Not interested, Jim said. Then you're going to regret this, Dalton said. Deeply regret it. And that's not a threat. That's a promise. He wheeled his horse and rode off, his men following. Jim watched them go, the rifle still in his hands, trying to control the anger and fear that warred in his chest. When they were gone, Sarah came down from the porch and hugged her father tightly. I was scared, she whispered. Me too, sweetheart, Jim admitted. Me too. Aida approached slowly. I should leave tonight before Sheriff comes. No, Jim said firmly. Running just makes you look guilty. We stay, we fight, we prove the truth. How? Aida asked. How we prove truth when powerful men want lies. Jim looked at Sam, at Sarah, at Aida. 3 people who trusted him to have an answer. The weight of that trust felt heavy as iron. I don't know yet, he admitted, but we'll find a way. We have to. That night, none of them slept well. The ranch felt different now, no longer a place of safety, but a fortress under siege. And outside in the darkness, Jim knew that Frank Dalton was planning his next move. The promise Jim had made was being tested already, and the real test he suspected had not even begun. The sun had barely cleared the horizon when Jim heard the sound of horses approaching the ranch. He was already awake, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. Sleep had been impossible, his mind turning over possibilities and problems until dawn had brought relief from the pretense of rest. But these were not the horses he had been expecting. Not Sheriff Bradley coming with warrants, not Dalton coming with more threats. These riders came from the south, from the direction of San Carlos Reservation, and they moved with purpose. Sam emerged from the bunkhouse, rifle in hand, then lowered it as the riders drew closer. "Boss!" he called. "Those are Apache." Jim stood, his hand instinctively moving to his pistol but not drawing it. 5 riders approached 4 younger men, flanking an older figure in the center. The elder sat his horse with the ease of someone who had been born in the saddle. His weathered face marked with the lines of 7 decades of desert living. As they reached the ranch yard, Jim felt recognition strike him like lightning. The elder's face was older, more lined, but the eyes were the same. Sharp, intelligent, missing nothing. "Red Skywalker," Jim breathed. The old Apache smiled, revealing gaps where teeth had been lost to time and hardship. "Jim Brennan, still alive, still stubborn, I see." "Red Sky," Jim said, moving forward. The 2 men clasped forearms in the old way, the grip of warriors who had fought side by side. "What brings you here?" "Heard my friend has trouble," Red Sky said. "Heard he is protecting Apache woman. When Jim Brennan protects someone, that person must be worth protecting. So I come." By now, Aita had emerged from the bunkhouse, freezing when she saw the Apache riders. Sarah appeared on the porch, curious but unafraid. Sam remained alert, watching the younger warriors who sat their horses with casual alertness. Red Sky's eyes moved to Aita, studying her with the intensity of someone who could read a life story in a face. He spoke in Apache, the liquid sounds of the language flowing easily. Aita responded, her voice hesitant at first, then stronger. Jim could not understand the words, but he understood the tone. Question and answer, assessment and explanation. After several minutes, Red Sky turned back to Jim. "This is White Eagle's widow," Red Sky said. "I knew her husband, good man, honorable, died because cavalry made mistakes, shot their own scout." His face hardened. "Many mistakes made in those days, still making them." "You know why she's here?" Jim asked. "I know she defended herself against white man who tried to force her," Red Sky said bluntly. "I know white man's law does not care about Apache woman's right to say no. I know powerful men want her dead to take your land." Jim should not have been surprised. Information traveled through the Apache community like water through stone, invisible but inexorable. "Then you know what we're facing." "I know," Red Sky confirmed. He dismounted with the stiffness of old bones, his warriors following suit. "That is why I am here. You and I, we are brothers. 12 years ago we fought bandits together. You saved my life, I saved yours. That bond does not break." The memory came back to Jim with crystalline clarity. A spring day in 1873, a gang of Mexican bandits raiding both the Apache camp and nearby ranches, killing indiscriminately. Jim and Red Sky, strangers, then finding themselves fighting back to back against overwhelming odds, the desperate struggle, the shared victory, the recognition that courage had no color, no tribe, only action. "I remember," Jim said quietly. "Brothers help brothers," Red Sky said simply. He looked at Aita again, speaking in English now so everyone could understand. "You are White Eagle's widow. You honor his memory by living with courage. Your husband would be proud." Aita's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. "Thank you, grandfather." Red Sky turned to Jim. "You plan to fight this in white man's court?" "Have to," Jim said. "Sheriff is coming with questions, maybe warrants. Dalton is pushing for her arrest. We need to prove self-defense, prove Mullins was the aggressor." "White man's court," Red Sky said with something that might have been amusement or disgust. "Always talking, never listening." He paused. "But Apache have way too. Bring conflict into circle, let all speak. Truth emerges when all voices heard." "You mean a public hearing," Jim said, understanding. "Force it out into the open where Dalton can't control everything." "Exactly," Red Sky said. "In daylight with witnesses, lies are harder to tell." He gestured to his warriors. "We will stay. Our presence sends message. Apache people stand with this woman. Any who harm her harm all of us." Jim felt something shift inside him, a weight being distributed across more shoulders. "That could bring you trouble." "Already have trouble," Red Sky said with a slight smile. "Living on reservation is trouble. Being Apache in white man's world is trouble. Might as well have trouble, that means something." Sarah brought out water and food for the visitors. The Apache warriors accepted with quiet dignity, settling into the shade near the barn. Red Sky sat on the porch with Jim, and for a while they talked of old times, of battles fought and friends lost, of the way the world had changed and not changed in equal measure. It was mid-morning when they saw a wagon approaching from town. Jim tensed, but Red Sky remained calm. "Only one wagon," the old warrior observed. "Not attack, maybe ally." He was right. As the wagon drew closer, Jim recognized Mrs. Chen at the reins, her small frame upright and determined. Beside her sat her husband, Chen Wei, a quiet man who let his wife take the lead in most things, but whose loyalty once given was absolute. Mrs. Chen stopped the wagon in front of the house and climbed down with practiced ease. "Mr. Brennan," she said formally. Then, looking at the assembled group, "I see you are gathering friends. Good. You will need them." "Mrs. Chen," Jim said, helping her onto the porch. "What brings you out here?" "News," she said, "and a proposition." She glanced at Ayita. "May I speak freely?" "Please," Ayita said. Mrs. Chen settled herself into a chair that Sam hurriedly provided. "In town, people are talking. Dalton is spreading stories, saying that Ayita murdered Jack Mullins in cold blood, saying you are harboring a dangerous criminal, saying that anyone who helps you is an enemy of progress and the railroad." "Expected as much," Jim said grimly. "But," Mrs. Chen continued, "not everyone believes him. Some of us remember what kind of man Mullins was. Some of us know what it is like to be called dangerous just for existing." She looked directly at Jim. "I came to America 20 years ago. People spit on me in the street, called me Yellow Devil, said I did not belong. But some people, good people, they helped. They saw me as human." She reached into a pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I have written names. 15 families. Chinese, Mexican, 2 Negro families, even 3 white families who have been helped by you over the years, Mr. Brennan. People you gave work when no one else would. People you gave credit when they had no money. People you treated with dignity." Jim took the paper, scanning the names. He recognized them all. Small kindnesses, he had thought, just doing what was right. "These people will stand with you," Mrs. Chen said. "Not all of them are brave enough to speak publicly, but they will be there. They will be seen, and that matters." "Why?" Jim asked. "Why risk Dalton's anger?" Mrs. Chen smiled, but it was sad. "Because today it is Ayita. Tomorrow it might be my children. We must draw a line somewhere. Might as well be here with a man who has already drawn his." Movement caught Jim's eye. A rider was approaching fast, dust rising behind him. As he drew closer, Jim recognized young Billy Thompson, one of the ranch hands. The boy was barely 18, eager and hard-working, but prone to nervousness. Right now he looked terrified. "Mr. Brennan," Billy called as he reined in his horse. "Doc Harrison sent me, said you need to come to town, said it's important." "What's happened?" Jim demanded. "It's Gus Palmer, the old prospector," Billy said. "He's at Doc's office. Says he has something to tell you about the night Mullins died. But he's scared, Mr. Brennan, real scared. Says if Dalton finds out he's talking, he's a dead man." Jim looked at Red Sky, at Mrs. Chen, at Sam. "This could be the break we need." "Could also be a trap," Sam warned. "Only one way to find out," Jim said. He turned to Billy. "Tell Doc I'm coming. Sam, you're with me. Red Sky, can you and your men stay here, watch over Sarah and Ayita?" Red Sky nodded. "No one will harm them while we live." The ride into town was tense. Jim and Sam kept their eyes moving, watching for ambush, for any sign of Dalton's men. But the road remained clear, the desert quiet, except for the sound of their horses' hooves. Mesquite Springs was busier than usual for mid-morning. Groups of men stood on corners talking in low voices. Jim felt eyes following them as they rode to Doc Harrison's office. Felt the weight of judgment and curiosity and fear. Doc Harrison met them at the door. He was a man of 50 with steady hands and sad eyes, someone who had seen too much suffering to be easily shocked. "Jim," he said quietly, "come in." quickly." Inside, on a narrow cot in the back room, lay Gus Palmer. The old prospector looked even more ancient than usual. His weathered face pale, his hands shaking. When he saw Jim, relief flooded his features. "Brennan," Gus said, his voice weak. "Thank God, I got to tell someone before Dalton shuts me up permanent." Jim pulled a chair close to the cot. "Tell me what you saw, Gus." Gus took a shuddering breath. "I was camped near Copper Creek, 3 weeks back, maybe 4. Panning for color, not finding much. It was evening, sun going down. I heard shouting. Man's voice, rough, angry." He paused, gathering strength. "I went to look, saw Jack Mullins. He was drunk, stumbling around, and I saw her, the Indian woman. She was backing away, hands up, saying no over and over. Clear as day I heard her. No, no, please, no." Jim felt his jaw tighten. "Go on." "Mullins grabbed her," Gus continued. "She fought, scratched him, tried to get away. He was laughing, saying things, ugly things about what he was going to do. She had a knife, small thing. She cut his arm, not deep, just trying to make him let go." Gus closed his eyes, remembering. They struggled. Mullins pushed her. She pushed back harder than he expected. He stumbled backward. There was a rock, big flat one. His head hit it, made a sound like a melon cracking. He went down and didn't get up. "And the woman?" Jim asked. She stood there, breathing hard, bleeding from where he'd hit her. "She watched him for maybe a minute. I could see her thinking, deciding. Then she took his canteen and ran. I don't blame her. Any jury would have hanged her, self-defense or not." "Why didn't you come forward before?" Jim asked, though he knew the answer. "Because I'm old and poor and Dalton owns half this town," Gus said bitterly. "Because I've seen what happens to people who cross him. But Doc here, he talked to me this morning. Said some things are worth the risk. Said I got to live with myself when I look in the mirror." Doc Harrison stepped forward. "I told him about the other women. 2 women I treated over the past 3 years. Both said Mullins assaulted them, both too scared to report it. One left town entirely, the other won't speak publicly, but I have my medical records. I've documented everything." Jim felt hope stirring for the first time since this nightmare began. "Gus, will you testify? Tell this story in public?" Gus was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Yeah, I will. But Brennan, you got to promise me something. You got to promise Dalton won't kill me for it." "I'll do everything I can to protect you," Jim said. "You have my word." "Your word's good enough," Gus said, relaxing slightly. "Always has been." They talked for another half hour, getting details, making sure Gus's story was clear and consistent. When they finally emerged from Doc's office, Jim felt the first stirring of real hope. They had an eyewitness, they had medical evidence, they had proof. But as they mounted their horses, Jim saw a figure watching from across the street. One of Dalton's men, the one called Jake. Their eyes met, and Jake smiled, slow and mean, before turning and walking toward the saloon where Dalton often conducted business. "He's going to tell Dalton," Sam said quietly. "I know," Jim replied, "which means we need to move fast, get Gus somewhere safe. Organize that public hearing before Dalton can stop us." They rode back toward the ranch, but Jim's mind was already racing ahead, planning, calculating. Red Sky's idea of a public hearing, of forcing everything into the open, that was the key. But they needed more than just Gus and Doc. They needed moral authority. They needed the community to see this as more than just a rancher fighting a land baron. As they crested the rise overlooking Red Creek Ranch, Jim saw something that made him rein in his horse. A black-clad figure was walking up the road toward the ranch. Father McKenna, his white collar bright in the sunlight. "Well," Sam said, "looks like word is spreading fast." Father McKenna reached the ranch just as Jim and Sam arrived. The priest's face was grave but determined. "Mr. Brennan," he said, "I heard what happened in town this morning. About Gus Palmer, about what he's willing to testify." "News travels fast," Jim observed. "In a small town, it always does," Father McKenna replied. "I came to tell you something. This Sunday I'm preaching about justice and mercy, about the woman caught in adultery and how Jesus told the crowd, 'Let him who is without sin cast the first stone.'" He looked directly at Jim. I'm also going to talk about Jack Mullins, about the kind of man he was, about the women he hurt. It won't be pretty, but it will be true. That could cost you your position, Jim said. Then it will cost me my position, Father McKenna said simply. But I did not become a priest to make people comfortable. I became a priest to speak truth. And the truth is that Aita defended herself against a predator. Any honest person can see that. Red Sky had joined them, listening silently. Now he spoke. The holy man has courage. Good. We will need courage from all of us in days ahead. Father McKenna regarded the Apache elder with interest. You are Red Sky Walker. I have heard of you. They say you are a man of wisdom. They say many things, Red Sky replied. Some even true. He smiled slightly. You speak of stones and judgment. Apache have similar teaching. We say walk in another's moccasins before judging their path. Wise words, Father McKenna said. Perhaps we are not so different, your people and mine. Perhaps not, Red Sky agreed. At least not the good ones among us. That evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and red, Jim found himself on the porch again. But this time he was not alone. Aita sat at the other end, Sarah between them, and Sam leaned against the railing. Red Sky and his warriors had made camp near the barn, their fire a small point of light in the gathering darkness. Pa, Sarah said quietly. What happens now? Now we force Dalton's hand, Jim replied. We demand a public hearing, not in the courthouse where he controls the judge, but out in the open. In front of the whole town, let everyone hear the evidence. Let them decide. Will it work? Sarah asked. I don't know, Jim admitted, but it's the best chance we have. Aita spoke for the first time in hours. All of you risk so much. For me. I still do not understand why. Sarah turned to look at her. Because it's right. Because you're part of our family now. Because that's what families do. Jim saw Aita's expression shift, saw something like wonder cross her face. Family, she repeated softly as if testing the word. Yes, Jim said firmly. Family. And families stand together. Red Sky's voice carried across the darkening yard, speaking in Apache to his warriors. The words were unfamiliar, but the tone was clear. Strength, solidarity, preparation for battle. Jim looked up at the emerging stars, at the vast expanse of desert sky. Somewhere out there, Frank Dalton was planning his next move. Somewhere, Sheriff Bradley was wrestling with his conscience. Somewhere, the town of Mesquite Springs was choosing sides. But here at Red Creek Ranch, a different kind of power was gathering. Not the power of money or position or guns, though they had guns enough if it came to that. This was the power of people standing together, of drawing a line and saying this far and no further. Tomorrow, Jim said to no one in particular, we go back to town, we talk to the sheriff, we demand that hearing, and we show Dalton that he doesn't own everything, he doesn't own us. Tomorrow, Red Sky agreed from across the yard. Tomorrow, Aita whispered. And in the darkness, with stars wheeling overhead and danger gathering like storm clouds, they prepared for what was to come. The promise had been made. Now it would be tested in the harsh light of day before the judgment of the community, with everything Jim had built hanging in the balance. But as he looked at the people gathered around him, at this unlikely coalition of ranchers and merchants and priests and Apache warriors, at his daughter's brave face and Aita's determined eyes, Jim felt something he had not felt in 4 years. He felt ready, ready to fight, ready to stand, ready finally to live again. The morning of the hearing arrived with the kind of clarity that comes before momentous events, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Jim had been awake for hours, pacing the porch, watching the sky transition from black to purple to the pale blue of dawn. He had not slept more than a few fitful hours, his mind running through everything that could go wrong. Everything they had to get right. Sarah emerged from the house as the sun broke over the eastern mountains, dressed in her mother's Sunday best, a simple blue dress that Margaret had worn to church. She had pinned her hair up, trying to look older, more serious. Jim's heart clenched at the sight of her. "You don't have to come," he said, though he knew it was pointless. "Yes, I do," Sarah replied. Her hands were steady, but Jim could see the fear in her eyes, the courage it took to push past it. "We all do." Aida appeared from the bunkhouse wearing the brown dress, the one that had been Margaret's, but she had added something. Around her neck hung a small leather pouch on a cord, traditional Apache, something she must have kept hidden until now. It was a declaration, subtle but unmistakable. "I am Apache. I am not ashamed." Red Sky and his warriors prepared their horses with quiet efficiency. The old man approached Jim, his weathered face serious. "Today, white man's law decides Apache woman's fate. Strange world we live in." "Strange and getting stranger," Jim agreed. "Red Sky, if this goes bad, if there's violence, get Sarah and Aida out. Don't wait for me. Just go." "If there is violence, we fight together," Red Sky said flatly. "That is what brothers do. No argument." Jim nodded, knowing better than to argue with the old warrior's sense of honor. Mrs. Chen arrived in her wagon, her husband beside her, and in the back sat 5 other families. Chinese, Mexican, one elderly Negro couple who had farmed on the edge of town for 20 years. They were dressed in their best clothes, their faces showing fear but also determination. "We are ready, Mr. Brennan," Mrs. Chen announced. "Where we go, they go, strength in numbers." The procession that left Red Creek Ranch that morning was unlike anything Mesquite Springs had ever seen. Jim and Sam rode in front, flanking the wagon that carried Aida and Sarah. Behind them came Red Sky and his warriors riding in formation, their presence both protective and provocative. Mrs. Chen's wagon followed, and behind that, on horseback and on foot, came others. Word had spread through the night, whispered in kitchens and workshops, and now people were joining one by one, 2 by 2. By the time they reached the outskirts of Mesquite Springs, their numbers had swollen to nearly 40. Not all were supporters. Some came out of curiosity, some to bear witness, some because they smelled conflict and wanted to see how it played out. But they came, and that was what mattered. The town square was already packed. Sheriff Bradley had set up a makeshift platform using boards laid across barrels. Judge Harlan Potter sat in a chair at one end, looking deeply uncomfortable. Frank Dalton stood near the other end, impeccably dressed, his face a mask of confidence. But Jim saw his eyes narrow as the procession entered the square, saw him counting numbers, recalculating odds. The crowd parted reluctantly, creating a path to the platform. Jim helped Aida down from the wagon, his hand steady on her elbow. She held her head high, meeting the stares of the townspeople with quiet dignity. Sarah stayed close to her, a silent statement of solidarity. Father McKenna was already there, having arrived early. He gave Jim a small nod of encouragement. Doc Harrison stood nearby, a leather satchel in his hands containing his medical records, his evidence. Sheriff Bradley stepped forward, raising his hands for quiet. The murmuring of the crowd gradually subsided. "Folks," Bradley called out, his voice carrying across the square, "we're here to determine the facts regarding the death of Jack Mullins and the involvement of the woman known as Aida. This is not a trial. This is a hearing to establish whether charges should be brought. Everyone will have a chance to speak. Everyone will be heard." Dalton's lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Crenshaw, who had come up from Tucson, stepped forward. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The proper venue for such proceedings is the courthouse, not a public square." Judge Harlan shifted in his seat. He was 65, a man who had held his position for 20 years through a combination of competence and compromise. Jim had known him to be fair once, but that was before Dalton's influence had spread like poison through every institution in town. "Mr. Crenshaw," the judge said slowly, "given the unusual circumstances and the public interest in this case, I'm allowing it. But decorum will be maintained. Anyone who disrupts these proceedings will be removed." Crenshaw's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Jim saw Dalton whisper something to him, saw the lawyer's face harden in response. "The prosecution may present its case," Judge Harlan announced. Crenshaw stepped forward, his voice smooth and practiced. Your Honor, the facts are simple. On the evening of September 15th, Jack Mullins, a respected member of this community, was found dead near Copper Creek. His skull was fractured, his money pouch was missing, and the last person seen with him was this Apache woman. He pointed at Aita, the gesture deliberately theatrical. She fled the scene. She hid for weeks. These are not the actions of an innocent woman. These are the actions of a murderer. He called his first witness a man named Randall Pierce, one of Dalton's ranch hands. Pierce took his place on the platform, his eyes not meeting anyone's directly. Mr. Pierce, Crenshaw said, tell the court what you saw on September 15th. I was riding near Copper Creek, Pierce said, his voice rehearsed. Saw Mullins talking to an Indian woman. Looked like they were arguing. Next day, Mullins was found dead. Did you see the woman strike Mr. Mullins? Crenshaw asked. Pierce hesitated just a fraction of a second. Can't say I saw that exact moment, but I saw them arguing fierce. Father McKenna stepped forward. Your Honor, may I question the witness? Judge Harlan looked surprised but nodded. Go ahead, Father. Mr. Pierce, the priest said gently. How far away were you when you observed this alleged argument? Maybe 100 yards, Pierce said. And could you hear what they were saying? Not exact words, no. Could you see their expressions clearly? Well, not perfectly, but. So you saw two people from 100 yards away, could not hear them, could not see their faces clearly, but you're certain they were arguing? Pierce's face reddened. It looked like arguing. Or it could have looked like a woman trying to get away from a man who was bothering her, Father McKenna suggested. Could it not? Objection, Crenshaw called. The witness can only testify to what he saw. Sustained, Judge Harlan said, but Jim saw doubt flickering in the old man's eyes. The testimony continued. Dalton produced two more witnesses, both similarly vague, both on his payroll. Their stories began to unravel under questioning from Father McKenna and surprisingly from several townspeople who called out inconsistencies. Then Doc Harrison stood. Your Honor, I have medical evidence to present. He opened his satchel and pulled out a folder. I examined Jack Mullins's body. The cause of death was indeed blunt force trauma to the skull consistent with falling backward onto a rock. However, he also had extensive defensive wounds. Doc held up photographs, crude but clear enough. Scratches on his forearms here and here, bruising on his wrists here, a cut on his bicep, shallow but recent. These are the wounds of someone who was fighting, not someone who was ambushed. He paused, letting that sink in. Furthermore, I must state for the record that over the past 3 years I treated 2 women who came to me after encounters with Jack Mullins. Both reported that he had assaulted them. Both refused to press charges out of fear. But I documented everything. He pulled out more papers, medical records written in his careful hand. One woman had bruises around her throat. Another had defensive wounds similar to those I found on Mullins. I am not proud that I did not speak up sooner. But I am speaking now. Jack Mullins had a pattern of violence against women. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Several women in the audience were crying. Jim saw Judge Harlan's face change, saw something like shame cross his features. Crenshaw tried to object, tried to dismiss the evidence as irrelevant, but the damage was done. The character of the victim was now in question. Then Gus Palmer took the platform. The old prospector looked terrified, his hands shaking, but his voice was steady as he told his story. He described what he had seen, the attack, the struggle, the accident. He held nothing back. It was self-defense, plain and simple, Gus concluded. That woman was fighting for her life, and she won. That's all there is to it. Crenshaw tried to tear into his testimony, suggesting Gus was too far away, that his memory was unreliable, that he was being paid by Jim Brennan. But Gus held firm, his old eyes fierce. I ain't been paid nothing except my conscience, Gus said sharply. And I ain't going to my grave with this lie on my soul. That woman defended herself. Anyone says different is lying. Then it was time for Aita to speak. Jim saw her hands trembling as she saw Sarah reach out and squeeze them once before letting go. Aita walked to the platform, small and alone in front of hundreds of watching eyes. Judge Harlan looked at her, his expression unreadable. "State your name for the record." "Aita," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Daughter of Two Rivers and Morning Star, widow of White Eagle." "Tell us what happened on September 15th, the judge said. Aita took a breath. Then she began to speak, and her voice grew stronger with each word. "I was camped near Copper Creek. I was alone. I have been alone since my husband died 8 months ago, killed by mistake by the soldiers he worked for. After he died, my people said I was not Apache enough because my mother was Mexican. They sent me away." She looked out at the crowd, meeting their eyes without flinching. "I tried to survive, hunt, trap, hide. But being woman alone is dangerous. Men see woman alone, they think she belongs to no one, so they can take her." Her hands clenched into fists. "Jack Mullins found my camp. He was drunk. He said he had been watching me. He said he would protect me, but I had to do things for him, things no widow should have to do, things no woman should have to do." Someone in the crowd gasped. Aita continued, relentless now. "I said no. I begged him to leave. I told him I was in mourning, that I could not be with any man. He laughed. He said Apache women do not get to say no to white men. He said that is the way of the world." Her voice broke slightly, then steadied. "He grabbed me. I fought. I had small knife. I cut him, trying to make him let go. He pushed me. I pushed back. He fell, hit his head on rock. I watched him bleed. I could have helped, maybe, could have tried to stop bleeding, but I did not." She raised her chin. "I let him die. And I am not sorry. I am not sorry I chose to live. I am only sorry he did not believe that my no meant no." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. Aita stood there, exposed and vulnerable but unbroken, and Jim felt something fierce and proud surge through him. Then Sarah stood up in the crowd. "Your Honor," she called out, her young voice clear, "may I speak?" Judge Harlan nodded, surprised. Sarah made her way to the platform. "My name is Sarah Brennan. Some of you have known me my whole life. You knew my mother, you know my father." She looked at Aita. 3 nights ago, men attacked our ranch. They shot at our house. One broke through our back door with a gun. He pointed it at me." Her voice shook but did not break. Aita did not run. She did not hide. She stood between me and that gun. She hit him with a cast-iron skillet and saved my life. If she is a murderer, why did she risk herself to save me? The question hung in the air. Jim saw several townspeople nodding, saw doubt replacing certainty on many faces. Red Skywalker stood, then his presence commanding immediate attention. He did not ask permission to speak, simply walked to the platform with the authority of an elder, of a man who had earned his right to be heard. "I am Red Skywalker," he announced. "I knew White Eagle. He was man of honor. His widow honors his memory." He looked at the crowd, his gaze sweeping across every face. "You judge her, you must judge me. You must judge all Apache people. You must judge yourselves." He turned to Jim. "This man, Jim Brennan, he is my brother. 12 years ago, we fought together against bandits. We saved each other's lives. When he gives his word, he keeps it. When he stands for someone, it is because they deserve standing for." Red Sky's voice grew harder. "Some of you look at Aita and see savage, see murderer. But you do not see woman fighting for life. You do not see widow with no protection. You do not see human beings saying, 'I have right to live, I have right to say no.'" He paused. "Maybe the savage ones are not who you think." The words struck like physical blows. Jim saw shame on many faces, saw the crowd shifting, reconsidering. Then Mrs. Chen stood. "I speak to," she called out. 20 years I live in this town. 20 years people call me names, say I do not belong. But some people help me. Jim Brennan helped me. Give me credit when I have no money. Treat me like human being." She pointed at Aita. "That woman, she is like me. Outsider. Unwanted. But she has right to defend herself. She has right to live. If you say no to that, then what you say to me, to my children, where does it stop? Others began to stand. A Mexican laborer, an elderly Negro man, a white rancher who had fallen on hard times and been helped by Jim. One by one they spoke, not all eloquently, not all confidently, but they spoke, and their voices added together became something powerful, something that could not be ignored. Judge Harlan held up his hand for silence. The crowd gradually quieted. The old judge looked tired, older than his years, but there was something in his face now that had not been there before, something like resolve. "I have heard the testimony," he said slowly. "I have seen the evidence, and I must render a decision." The world seemed to stop. Jim felt his heart hammering, felt Sarah's hand slip into his. Aita stood alone on the platform, straight and proud, waiting for judgment. Judge Harlan stood. "Based on the evidence presented, based on the testimony of witnesses, and based on the clear pattern of aggressive behavior by the deceased, I find that the death of Jack Mullins was the result of self-defense. No charges will be brought against Aita. She is free to go." The crowd erupted. Some cheered, some shouted in anger. But the decision had been made, and it was final. Jim saw Dalton's face turn purple with rage, saw Crenshaw grab his arm saying something urgent, and then Jim saw something else. Dalton's other hand moving, pulling something from his coat, a pistol. "No!" Jim shouted, but his voice was lost in the chaos. Dalton raised the gun, pointing it at Aita. Time seemed to slow. Jim was moving, trying to reach her, but he was too far away. Red Sky was shouting a warning in Apache. Sarah was screaming. Then Sam Mitchell, solid, dependable. Sam threw himself forward. The gun fired. Sam staggered, blood blooming on his shoulder, but he had knocked Dalton's arm aside. The bullet that had been meant for Aita's heart hit the wooden platform instead. Red Sky's warriors were moving, surrounding Dalton. Sheriff Bradley finally found his courage, drawing his own weapon, shouting for order. The crowd scattered, people diving for cover. Dalton struggled, but Red Sky himself stepped forward, his old hand iron hard on Dalton's wrist, forcing the gun to drop. "You have shown yourself," the Apache elder said softly. "No more hiding behind others, no more lies." Sheriff Bradley snapped handcuffs on Dalton's wrists. The land baron was still shouting, still threatening, but his power had broken. In trying to kill Aita in front of everyone, he had revealed himself completely. There would be no talking his way out of this. No buying his way free. Doc Harrison was already kneeling beside Sam, examining the wound. "Flesh wound," he announced with relief. "Painful but not fatal. He'll be fine." Jim reached Aita, pulling her close without thinking, just needing to know she was safe. She was shaking, but when she looked up at him, her eyes were clear. "It is over," she said wonderingly. "It is truly over." "Yes," Jim said. "It's over. You're free." Around them, the crowd was slowly calming. Sheriff Bradley was leading Dalton away, the once powerful man, now just another criminal in chains. Father McKenna was saying a prayer. Mrs. Chen was organizing people, restoring order in her practical way. And through it all, Sarah stood with her hand on Aita's arm, young and brave and certain of what was right. The promise had been tested. The promise had held, and in holding it had changed everything. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Mesquite Springs as the crowd slowly dispersed people, returning to their homes and businesses with much to discuss and more to reconsider. Jim stood near Doc Harrison's office where Sam was being bandaged, the old foreman grumbling about the fuss being made over what he called a scratch. "Hold still," Doc ordered, wrapping clean cloth around Sam's shoulder. "You're lucky. Another inch to the right and this would be a very different conversation." "Wasn't luck," Sam said. "Was reflex. Saw the gun coming up, moved before I thought. Knocked his arm just enough to save her. Taking a bullet was just the price." He looked at Jim. "Boss, you got coffee at home because I could use about a gallon of it." Jim managed a tired smile. "We'll get you home, Sam. You earned that coffee and then some." Aida stood nearby watching the treatment with the focused attention of someone who understood wounds and healing. When Doc finished, she stepped forward. "There is Apache medicine," she said quietly. "Plant that grows near water, helps wounds heal faster, prevents infection." Doc Harrison looked at her with interest. "I'd like to know more about that. Perhaps we could talk sometime, compare knowledge." Aida nodded, surprised and pleased. "Yes, I would like that." Red Skywalker approached his warriors, flanking him. The old Apache's face was grave. "Jim Brennan, your enemy is in chains, but chains can be broken. Men like Frank Dalton have long arms, many friends. You must watch carefully." "I know," Jim said, "but for now at least the immediate danger is past." "For now," Red Sky agreed. He glanced at Aida. "You have proven yourself, niece. Your husband would be proud. You fought with courage, spoke with truth. These are the old ways, the good ways." Aida bowed her head slightly. "Thank you, grandfather. Your presence gave me strength." Red Sky smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "No, strength was always yours. We only reminded you it was there." He turned to Jim. "My warriors and I must return to San Carlos. But know this, brother. If you need us, send word, we will come." The two men clasped forearms in the warrior's grip, a bond renewed and strengthened. Then Red Sky and his men mounted their horses and rode south, dust rising behind them as they disappeared into the desert heat. Sheriff Bradley emerged from his office, his face drawn with exhaustion and something that looked like relief. "Jim," he called. "A word." They stepped aside, leaving the others near the wagon. Bradley removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "I owe you an apology. I let Dalton compromise me. Let him make me forget why I took this badge in the first place." "Tom," Jim said, "what matters is what you did today. You arrested him. You chose right over easy." "Doesn't excuse the times I didn't," Bradley replied. "But I'm going to do better, starting now. I've already sent a telegram to the territorial marshal. Dalton's going to face real justice, not the kind he can buy." He looked back toward his office where Dalton was being held. "He's already threatening lawsuits, claiming conspiracy, saying he'll have my badge. But you know what? Let him try. Some things are worth losing a job over." "Some things are," Jim agreed. He offered his hand. Bradley took it, and in that grip was understanding, mutual respect earned through trial. Mrs. Chen appeared with her wagon, her husband beside her. "Mr. Brennan," she said, "we are going back to store, but first I want to say thank you for having courage to stand, for showing rest of us that standing is possible." "I should be thanking you," Jim replied. "Without your support, without everyone who came forward, this might have ended very differently." "That is how it works," Mrs. Chen said with a slight smile. "One person stands, then another, then another. Soon whole community is standing. You were first. That is what matters." As the Chen wagon rolled away, Father McKenna approached. The priest looked tired but satisfied. "Well," he said, "that was certainly the most eventful church social I've ever witnessed, though it wasn't technically a church social." Despite everything, Jim laughed. "Father, thank you. Your testimony, your willingness to speak truth that carried weight." "I only said what needed saying," Father McKenna replied. "Though I suspect my next sermon will be less controversial. The congregation needs time to digest all this." He glanced at Aida. "Young woman, you showed remarkable courage today. If you ever need spiritual counsel, my door is open. Any faith, any background, we're all God's children." Aida met his eyes. "Thank you, Father. I may take you up on that. I have much to think about." The journey back to Red Creek Ranch was quiet. Sam dozed in the back of the wagon, his wounded shoulder cushioned by blankets. Sarah sat beside Aida, occasionally squeezing her hand. Jim drove his mind, turning over everything that had happened, everything that had changed. When they finally reached the ranch, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Home. Safe. Changed, but still standing. Sam was installed in the main house in the guest room where he could be watched and tended. Sarah immediately set about making soup, needing something practical to do with her nervous energy. Aita helped her, the two women moving around the kitchen with growing familiarity, their bond deepening through shared experience. Jim stood on the porch watching the sunset, feeling the weight of the day settling into his bones. He heard footsteps and turned to see Aita joining him. She stood at a respectful distance, gazing out at the land. "This morning I thought I might die," she said quietly, "or be taken away to hang. Now I am free. It does not feel real yet." "Give it time," Jim said. "Freedom takes some getting used to when you've been running for so long." "I owe you my life," Aita said, turning to face him. "You and Sam and Sarah and everyone who stood up. I do not know how to repay such debt." "No debt," Jim said firmly. "We did what was right. That's not something you owe payment for." Aita was quiet for a moment. "When I first spoke to you, when I said kill me or be my husband, those were the only choices I could see. Death or survival through marriage. Nothing else seemed possible." "And now?" Jim asked gently. "Now I see there are more choices," Aita said. "More possibilities. I can choose to stay or go, to build a life on my own terms. That is freedom I did not know existed." She looked at him directly, and Jim saw something in her eyes that made his breath catch. Not the desperation of their first meeting, not the fear of the trial. Something softer, more complex. "Jim Brennan," she said carefully. "You asked nothing of me, expected nothing, just gave help when it was needed. I do not know many men like that. I did not know any before you." "I'm just a rancher," Jim said, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just a man trying to do right." "Just a rancher," Aita repeated with a slight smile. "Who risked his home, his daughter's safety, his reputation for stranger. Who kept his word when breaking it would have been easier. Who stood against powerful man and won." She moved closer, close enough that Jim could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. "In Apache way, when someone saves your life, bond is created. Sacred bond. But this is more than that. You did not just save my life. You gave me back myself." Jim found himself reaching out his hand, cupping her cheek gently. She did not pull away. For a moment they stood there, connected in a way that went beyond words, beyond debt or obligation. Something was growing between them, had been growing since that first desperate meeting by the creek. Something neither had expected, but both were beginning to recognize. "Aita," Jim said softly, "I don't want you to feel you owe me anything. Not gratitude, not obligation. If you stay, if you choose to be here, I want it to be because you want to, not because you feel you must." "I know," Aita said. She covered his hand with hers. "That is why I think I am beginning to want to." The moment was interrupted by Sarah calling from inside that dinner was ready. They stepped apart, but something had shifted, something had been acknowledged. As they went inside together, Jim felt warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the fading heat of the day. Dinner was a strange affair. Sam dozed with laudanum, for the pain regaled them with increasingly absurd stories from his youth, most of which Jim suspected were embellished, if not entirely fabricated. Sarah laughed until tears ran down her face. Even Aita smiled, her face transforming with the expression. After the meal, after Sam had been settled for the night and Sarah had gone to her room, Jim found himself once again on the porch. The stars were emerging, brilliant points of light in the darkening sky. He thought about Margaret, about the life they had built together, about the grief that had defined his existence for 4 years. The door opened and Aita emerged. She had changed into a nightdress, one of Margaret's that Sarah had given her, and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders against the cool evening air. She sat down on the porch steps, leaving space between them, but close enough to talk quietly. "Tell me about your wife," Aita said. "Sarah speaks of her often. I see her photograph, but I want to hear from you." Jim was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. "Margaret was kind," he finally said. Genuinely kind, the sort that sees someone in need and can't walk past without helping. She was smarter than me by half, though she never made me feel less for it. She could calm a spooked horse with a word, grow vegetables in pure desert, and make Sarah laugh no matter how bad the day had been. He paused, remembering. When she got sick, the fever, I couldn't save her. Best doctors, everything I could buy or beg, none of it mattered. She died in our bed with me holding her hand, and the last thing she said was, "Take care of Sarah. Don't let grief turn you hard." But grief did turn you hard, Aida said softly. It was not a question. For a while, Jim admitted, I built walls, kept everyone at arm's length, just worked and raised Sarah and told myself that was enough, that I didn't need anything else. And now? Jim looked at this woman who had appeared in his life, offering death or marriage, and had somehow given him a third option he had not known he needed. Now I'm learning that maybe I was wrong, that maybe living means more than just surviving. Aida nodded slowly. I understand that. After White Eagle died, I thought my life was over. Thought the best I could hope for was to exist until existence ended. But today, when Judge said I was free, I felt something I had not felt in long time. What was that? Jim asked. Hope, Aida said simply. Hope that maybe there is more life, more possibility, more than just surviving. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the desert. Finally, Aida spoke again. Jim Brennan, I have question. Ask it. When I am ready, when I have had time to remember who I am without fear, without running, would you be interested in knowing me? Really knowing me, not as woman you saved, but as person. Jim felt his heart beat faster. I would like that very much. Good, Aida said. She stood, the shawl falling around her shoulders. Then we will take time. We will learn each other, and we will see what grows. She paused at the door. Thank you, Jim, for today, for everything, for seeing me. Thank you, Jim replied, for letting me. After she went inside, Jim remained on the porch for a long time. He looked up at the stars, at the vast expanse of sky, and spoke quietly to the night. Margaret, he said, I think I'm going to be all right. Sarah's growing up strong and brave just like you wanted, and there's someone here who needs help becoming herself again. I think you'd like her. I think you'd approve. The stars offered no answer. But Jim felt a peace settle over him that he had not felt in 4 years. Not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of moving forward while still honoring the past. Inside the house, Sarah lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. She had seen death threatened, had seen courage displayed, had seen her father become himself again, after years of just going through motions. And she had seen something else, something growing between her father and Aida. Something that did not frighten her but filled her with a quiet hope. Mama, she whispered to the darkness. I think Pa's going to be happy again. I think we're all going to be happy. I hope that's okay with you. I hope you'd understand. In her room, Aida sat on the edge of her bed, the leather pouch around her neck held in her hands. Inside was a small braid of White Eagle's hair, the only thing she had kept from her old life. She pressed it to her lips, then to her forehead. Husband, she said in Apache. I honor your memory. I will always honor your memory. But I am still alive, and I think maybe I want to live again. Truly live. I hope you would understand. I hope you would want this for me. She carefully returned the pouch to its place around her neck, then lay down. For the first time in months, she fell asleep without fear, without nightmares, without the weight of survival crushing her chest. At Red Creek Ranch, under the vast Arizona sky, 3 people slept. 3 people who had been broken in different ways, who had found each other through desperate circumstance, who were beginning to understand that healing was possible. That moving forward did not mean forgetting the past, that family could be chosen as well as born. The promise had been kept, justice had been served. And now, slowly, carefully, life could begin again. But the story was not over yet. Because promises once made and kept have a way of growing into something larger, and the bonds formed in crisis have a way of deepening into something lasting. The ranch was quiet. The desert was at peace, and tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own opportunities, its own chances to choose courage over fear, hope over despair, life over mere existence. For now, though, there was rest. Hard-earned, desperately needed, deeply satisfying rest. And in the morning there would be coffee and breakfast and the work that never ends on a ranch. But there would also be conversation and laughter and the slow, careful building of something new from the ashes of what had been lost. The promise had been kept. Now it was time to see what came next. 2 months had passed since the hearing in Mesquite Springs. Winter was settling over the Arizona territory, bringing cooler nights and a clarity to the air that made the mountains seem closer than they were. At Red Creek Ranch, life had found a new rhythm, different from before, but no less real, no less solid. Jim stood in the barn repairing a saddle that had seen better days when he heard the sound of laughter drifting from the corral. He set down his tools and walked to the doorway, leaning against the frame to watch. Aita was working with a young mare, one of the spring foals, now grown skittish and uncertain. But under Aita's patient hands, the horse was calming, learning to trust. Sarah sat on the fence rail, calling out encouragement, her face bright with genuine joy. The two women had grown close over these months, their bond deepening from shared trauma into something that looked remarkably like sisterhood. Sam appeared beside Jim, his wounded shoulder now healed, though he claimed it still ached when rain was coming. "She's got a gift with horses," he observed, nodding toward Aita. "Better than most men I've known, and I've known plenty." "She does," Jim agreed. He watched as Aita murmured something in Apache to the mare, her hands gentle but firm on the halter. The horse whinnied softly and nuzzled her shoulder. Sarah clapped her hands in delight. "Boss," Sam said carefully, "I've been meaning to talk to you about something." "What's on your mind?" "The woman," Sam said. "Aita, you got feelings for her?" Jim was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "I do. Didn't expect to. Didn't plan on it, but yes." "Good," Sam said, "because she's got feelings for you too. Blind man could see it. Question is, what you planning to do about it?" "I don't know," Jim admitted. "Part of me says it's too soon. Margaret's only been gone 4 years. Part of me worries about what people will say. And part of me is just scared. Scared of losing someone again, scared of not being enough." Sam snorted. "Boss, with respect, that's horse shit. Mrs. Margaret, she wouldn't want you alone forever. She'd want you happy. As for what people say, since when do you care about that? And as for being enough, that woman chose to stay here when she could have gone anywhere. That tell you something." Jim smiled despite himself. "When did you get so wise about matters of the heart?" "Been around a long time," Sam replied. "Seen enough to know that happiness doesn't come along often. And when it does, smart man doesn't waste it worrying about what might go wrong. He just holds on and tries to deserve it." That evening, as had become their custom, Jim and Aita sat on the porch after dinner while Sarah did her studies inside. The air was cool enough to need shawls and jackets, but neither minded. The silence between them was comfortable, the kind that only comes when two people have learned each other's rhythms. "I received a letter today," Aita said, "from Red Sky Walker." "What did he say?" "He writes that spring planting is coming at San Carlos. They could use help, people who know the land. He invites me to come to teach the young ones to be part of the community again." She paused. "He says I would be welcome, that they were wrong to turn me away before." Jim felt his chest tighten. "That's good," he managed. "That they're making it right." "It is good," Aita agreed. She was quiet for a moment. "But I wrote back and told him I am already home." Jim turned to look at her, hope and fear warring in his chest. "You did?" "Yes," Aita said. She met his eyes directly. "These 2 months I have been thinking, trying to understand what I want, who I am now. I am not the same woman who stood by that creek and asked you to kill her. I am not even the same woman who stood in that town square and told her story." She gestured at the ranch, at the land spreading out under the darkening sky. This place has given me time to heal, to remember that I am more than my fear, more than my survival. Sarah has become like sister to me. Sam treats me like family, and you... She paused, searching for words. You see me, Jim Brennan, really see me. Not Apache woman, not victim, not even survivor, just Aita, person, woman, someone with thoughts and feelings and worth. That's all you ever were, Jim said softly, all you ever needed to be. I know that now, Aita said, but knowing it and feeling it are different things. You helped me feel it. Jim reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were rough from work, strong and capable. They fit perfectly in his. Aita, these past 2 months having you here, it's been good, better than good. The ranch feels alive again. Sarah is happier than I've seen her since Margaret died, and He took a breath, gathering courage. I find myself thinking about the future again. Not just getting through days, but actually looking forward to tomorrow, to next week, to next year. And in all those tomorrows I see you. Aita's hand tightened on his. I see you too, in my tomorrows. But Jim, I need to know something. When you look at me, do you see me, or do you see what I could be, who I might replace? I see you, Jim said with absolute certainty. Margaret was Margaret, you are you. I loved her. I love her memory, but what I feel for you, it's different. It's its own thing. It doesn't replace what was. It's just new. Good and new and real. I loved White Eagle, Aita said. I will always honor his memory, but he is gone, and I am here, and I think maybe I am ready to love again. If the right man asks. Jim felt his heart hammering. Aita, I know we haven't known each other long. I know this all happened fast and strange, but I also know that I want you in my life. Not as guest, not as helper, as partner, as wife, if you'd have me. He pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, simple silver with a small turquoise stone. This was my grandmother's, he explained. Margaret wore her mother's ring. I saved this thinking maybe someday Sarah might want it. But I'd like you to have it, if you'll say yes. Aita took the box with trembling hands, looking at the ring. Tears welled in her eyes but did not fall. When I said marry me that day by the creek, I meant survive. This is different, this is choose, this is want. She looked up at him, and in her eyes Jim saw love real and true and chosen freely. Yes, Jim Brennan. I will marry you. Not because I must, because I want to. Because I choose you. Because I choose this life we can build together. Jim slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. Then he pulled her close and they kissed, gentle at first, and then deeper, a promise sealed not in desperation, but in hope, in choice, in love freely given. Inside the house, Sarah had been watching through the window. When she saw her father kiss Aita, when she saw them embrace, she felt her eyes fill with tears. But they were good tears, happy tears. She pressed her hand against the window glass and whispered, "Thank you, Mama, for sending her to us, for letting Pa be happy again." The wedding took place on a crisp January morning. Father McKenna officiated, but Red Skywalker had traveled from San Carlos to perform traditional Apache blessings as well. The ceremony was held at the ranch under the open sky, with the desert stretching out in all directions. The guests were an unusual mix. Townspeople from Mesquite Springs, many who had stood with them during the hearing. Mrs. Chen and her family. Doc Harrison and his wife. Sam, of course, standing as Jim's best man, his shoulder healed but his loyalty unchanged. Red Sky and a delegation of Apache elders. Mexican families from the surrounding ranches. Chinese workers from the railroad. Negro farmers from the east side of town. A gathering of outsiders and allies, of people who had learned that family had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with choice. Sarah stood beside Aita, her face glowing with happiness. She wore her mother's Sunday dress, and around her neck was a small pendant that had belonged to Margaret. Aita wore a dress that blended both cultures, white cotton in the traditional style but decorated with Apache beadwork that she and Sarah had worked on together for weeks. Jim wore his best suit, the one he had worn to marry Margaret 20 years ago. It still fit, though it was a bit tighter around the middle. He stood under an arch that Sam and the ranch hands had built from desert wood and woven with winter branches. Father McKenna spoke first. "We are gathered today to witness the union of two souls who have found each other through trial and hardship, through courage and faith. James Brennan and Aita come before us not as strangers seeking shelter in marriage, but as two people who have chosen each other freely with open eyes and full hearts." Then Red Skywalker stepped forward, speaking in Apache with Father McKenna translating. "In the old ways, marriage is a circle. Two people come together and the circle is complete, but the circle is not closed. It opens to include family, community, future. These two have already proven the strength of their circle. Now they make it sacred." He performed the traditional blessing, mixing ash and pollen, speaking words that had been spoken for generations. Then Father McKenna took over, leading them through the Christian vows. When it came time for Jim to speak, he took Aita's hands in his. "Aita, you came into my life when I had given up on living. You reminded me that there is more to existence than just surviving. You showed me courage when I had forgotten what it looked like. I promise to see you always, to stand beside you always, to honor your strength and your spirit for as long as I live." Aita's voice was steady, though her eyes shone with tears. "Jim Brennan, you gave me life when I was ready to die. But more than that, you gave me choice. You gave me freedom. You gave me home. I promise to be your partner, your equal, to build with you, to work beside you, to love you, not because I must, but because I choose to. Every day I choose you." When Father McKenna pronounced them husband and wife, the gathered crowd erupted in cheers. Jim and Aita kissed, and in that kiss was everything they had been through, everything they had overcome, everything they hoped to build. The celebration that followed was unlike anything Mesquite Springs had ever seen. Mrs. Chen had prepared traditional Chinese dishes. The Mexican families brought tamales and sweetbreads. Red Sky's people contributed venison and fry bread. Doc Harrison's wife had made a cake 3 layers high and decorated with careful precision. It was a feast of cultures, a gathering of communities, a celebration of unity forged through shared struggle. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Jim found himself standing with Red Sky, watching the celebration. "You have done well, brother," Red Sky said. "Built something good here, not just ranch, community, family." "Couldn't have done it without you," Jim replied, "without everyone who stood up. That is the way of things," Red Sky said. "One person stands, others follow. You were first. That takes special courage." He was quiet for a moment, then continued. "Frank Dalton, he is in territorial prison now, yes." "Yes," Jim confirmed. "Attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud. He'll be there for years. His land holdings are being sold off to pay his debts. Some good people are buying it, people who'll treat their workers fair." "Good," Red Sky said. "Sometimes justice actually works." He smiled. "Not often, but sometimes." As darkness fell, lanterns were lit, casting warm light across the gathering. Someone produced a fiddle, another a guitar. Music filled the air, a mix of styles and traditions that somehow blended into something beautiful. Jim danced with Aita, their movements simple but sure. He was not a graceful dancer, but she did not seem to mind. They moved together, and in that movement was comfort, was partnership, was home. Later, much later, when the guests had departed and the ranch had settled into quiet, Jim and Aita stood together on their porch. Sarah had gone to bed exhausted but happy. Sam and the hands were in their bunks. The world was at peace. "Husband," Aita said, testing the word. "It sounds strange. Good but strange." "Wife," Jim replied. "Sounds right to me." They went inside together to the bedroom that had been Jim's alone for 4 years and was now theirs. On the wall, Margaret's photograph still hung, but it had been joined by another. A photograph taken just that afternoon of Jim and Aita on their wedding day, flanked by Sarah and red sky, surrounded by their gathered community. "She is still here," Aita said, nodding at Margaret's picture. "That is good. I do not want her forgotten." "She won't be," Jim said. "She's part of this house, part of Sarah, part of me. But you're here too now, and that's good too." "Two loves," Aita said. "Different times, different hearts, both real." "Both real," Jim agreed. They lay down together that night, husband and wife, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely way, who had built something real and lasting from desperate beginnings. As they drifted towards sleep, Jim thought about how far they had come. From that day by the creek when a desperate woman had offered him a choice between death and marriage, when he had chosen neither and instead offered help. From the fear and the running and the threat of violence. From the public hearing and the moment when justice could have gone either way. From all of that darkness into this light, this peace, this home. "Jim," Aita murmured, half asleep. "Thank you." "For what?" "For keeping your promise, for standing, for seeing me." "Thank you," Jim replied, "for letting me, for choosing to stay, for choosing us." Outside, the desert night was cold and clear. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal patterns. Somewhere coyotes called to each other, their voices carrying across the empty spaces. The land endured as it always had, as it always would. But inside Red Creek Ranch, something new had been built. A family forged not by blood but by choice. A home created not by inheritance but by effort and love, and the willingness to stand for what was right even when it was hard. The months that followed brought their own challenges and joys. Spring arrived with its work of planting and birthing. Summer brought heat and drought and the constant labor of keeping a ranch alive. Autumn brought harvest and preparation for winter's cold. Through it all, Jim and Aita worked side by side. She brought knowledge of the land that surprised and impressed him. He brought patience and steadiness that calmed her lingering fears. Together they built something stronger than either could have managed alone. Sarah blossomed under Aita's guidance, learning Apache ways alongside ranch work, growing into a young woman who understood that strength came in many forms, that courage meant choosing right over easy, that family was defined by love rather than blood. Doc Harrison and Aita began meeting regularly, sharing knowledge of healing and medicine. Her understanding of desert plants and their properties complemented his formal training. Together they treated ailments and injuries with a combination of old and new, traditional and modern. The ranch prospered. Word spread that Jim Brennan treated workers fairly, that his foreman was a man of integrity, that his wife was a skilled horsewoman and healer. Good people came looking for work. The operation expanded not through exploitation but through honest effort and mutual respect. Mrs. Chen's store became a gathering place for the community that had formed around the trial, a place where Chinese and Mexican and Negro and white could shop and talk and be treated with equal dignity. The coalition that had stood together in crisis remained connected, a network of support and friendship. Father McKenna's church saw increased attendance not because he preached softer messages, but because he had proven himself a man who lived his faith rather than just speaking it. His sermons on justice and mercy resonated with people who had seen both in action. Judge Harlan Potter, having found his courage in that public square, continued to serve with renewed integrity. Some said the hearing had changed him, reminded him of the man he had been before compromise became habit. He retired 2 years later, respected rather than feared, his conscience clear at last. Young Billy Thompson, the ranch hand whose urgent ride had brought Jim to Gus Palmer's testimony, stayed on at Red Creek Ranch. Under Sam's mentorship, he grew from a nervous boy into a capable foreman, eventually managing a section of the expanded operation. And at San Carlos Reservation, Red Skywalker spoke often of his friend Jim Brennan and the Apache woman who had found a home among white people without forgetting her heritage. Young people heard the story and understood that bridges could be built, that different worlds could touch without one destroying the other. On a warm evening in late summer, nearly a year after the wedding, Jim and Aita sat on their porch as had become their habit. Sarah was inside writing a letter to Red Sky Walker, with whom she had maintained a regular correspondence. The desert air was cooling, bringing relief from the day's heat. Aida placed Jim's hand on her belly, holding it there. "Feel," she said softly. Jim felt movement, small but unmistakable. His eyes widened. "A baby, Aida confirmed. Due in winter. Doc Harrison confirmed it yesterday." Jim felt tears prick his eyes. "A baby," he repeated, wonderstruck. He thought of Margaret, of the daughter they had raised together, of the life they had built. And he thought of Aida, of this new life they were building, of this child who would carry both legacies forward. "Are you happy?" Aida asked. "I'm terrified," Jim admitted. "And yes, very happy, both at once." Aida laughed, and the sound was pure joy. "Me too. Both at once." They sat together as the stars emerged, as the desert settled into its nightly rhythms, planning and dreaming and simply being present with each other. A rancher and his wife, a man who had learned to live again, and a woman who had chosen life over death. The promise Jim had made that day by the creek, the promise to stand beside Aida and help her find justice, had grown into something neither could have imagined. It had become a marriage, a family, a community, a legacy. And as they sat there under the vast Arizona sky, with the future growing within Aida, and the past honored in their hearts, they understood that promises, when kept with courage and faith, have a way of transforming not just individual lives, but entire worlds. The ranch was quiet, the night was peaceful, and tomorrow would bring its own work, its own challenges, its own joys. But for now, there was this moment, this perfect, precious moment of peace and love and hope. The promise had been kept. The promise had grown, and the story that had begun with desperate words by a desert creek had become something beautiful, something lasting, something real. At Red Creek Ranch, under the endless stars, life continued, changed but enduring, broken but healed, and in the healing made stronger than before. This was the legacy they would leave, not just land or buildings or wealth, but the understanding that courage matters, that standing for right makes a difference, that love freely chosen is stronger than any bond of obligation. And in the years to come, when people spoke of Jim Brennan and Aida, they would tell a story not of rescue but of partnership, not of charity but of mutual respect, not of one person saving another but of two people choosing each other, and in that choosing saving themselves. The end of one story, the beginning of another, the continuation of life in all its beautiful, complicated, wonderful reality, and that perhaps was the greatest promise of all.